So
Yes, it is.
sunny and beautiful.
I feel so amazing to be with you awesome woman today.
Likewise, I'm so excited, and I know we are going to have a wonderful time.
Yes.
And Robin, it's my first time meeting you, so great.
Yes, likewise, my first time meeting everyone as well.
I'm sure we're going to have a very rich conversation. So we want to thank everybody for joining us here on Facebook. We are live at this point?
Yes, we're live.
Oh, this is exciting. Hello, everyone.
I think we're in speaker view, so we're going to stay in speaker view, or we're going to do the 4 view?
The 4 view is
speaker view, or we're going to do the 4 view?
The 4 view.
I think the gallery view would be nice, so we can all see each other.
Yes. This one is better? Perfect. So I guess
You see me moving up, dancing to the beat of my like music. Ah, there we are. We look so good.
Perfect. So now we're ready.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you all for being here. I'm so excited that we are going to have a great time together. So thank you all for being here.
And of course, we're going to have some technical challenges.
Technical challenges, but I hope we get in there.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for accepting to be part of the I Rise series of conversations. Basically, this is a Women of Impact organization initiatives to empower and give tools to people, orientation, a solution to issue we are facing in our society. So today's topic is race and discrimination, how they affect the mental health of women and young generations. And I'm receiving for you all today 3 phenomenal women that are doing an amazing job in their community. They're impacting people's lives. And the first one is Nicole Waldron. She is a social advocate, activist, and event specialist. There is also Robin Simpson, who are mental health educator and public speaker. And we also have Coco LaRain, an award-winning speaker, trainer, a coach dedicated to inspire women. So today we are going to have a discussion on the topic of race and discrimination, and to provide solutions and tools that can benefit our community, mostly women and young generation, young people, children, etc. So the studies as shown, I made my research, and the studies are shown that people exposed to racism or discrimination have a poorer outcome of health, especially particularly the mental health. According also to Canadian Mental Health Association, 1 to 5 people are affected by mental health, and National Alliance on Mental Health. So when it comes to mental health, we often think or talk about depression, anxiety, stress, schizophrenia, bipolar people. But what's happened, because there is another issue as race and discrimination, who also can be a factor of mental health. Like what happened when we have these factors, all that I've listed, plus having your ethnicity, color, identity to deal with, especially when you don't choose to be Black, when you don't choose to be the color that you're born with. What do you think about, I would like to talk to Nicole Waldron. You are very involved in your community in anything that is mental health. What do you think about the issue of race and discrimination in America and Canada right now? Do you think there is a room for hope?
Oh, there's always room for hope. I think no matter what issue we face in life, there's always room for hope. I believe we must always look for the opportunities in the crisis. And being Black, we've all been Black. We've been born Black. We can't run from our Black skin. So it's something that we have learned to be and deal with. Fortunately and unfortunately for us, as Black Canadians, Black Americans, Black Caribbeans, I'm originally from Trinidad, we have learned how to lead while bleeding. And we are always in this constant state of mourning in some form. And as you know, grief takes on different challenges. And therefore, it can affect our mental health in different in different ways. And Coco and I talk about this all the time, leading while leading, and our mental health and our mental wellness. And so there's always hope, but it's about perspective and about how you choose to deal with the situation and your support systems that you put around you as well.
Yes. You talk about the support system and also the opportunity in the crisis. What can be the opportunity for you in the crisis? And what's going on right now as a Black people leader in community? What can be an opportunity to bring something on the table?
I think one of the opportunities in the crisis that I have seen is that we've actually been given permission to speak, in a sense. And people have the ability to have more individuals of their own peers and of the wider community in the allyship to speak about what they're experiencing. Even though there may be some times where you may still have that fear of repercussions, but you have more people for you. And it's given this sense of courage to many, and more ears are open to listening. So that's one of the great opportunities in this crisis that we're facing. And the advocacy that we can do is even taking on a different measure than even our forefathers. They set some certain grounds before. We had our Martin Luther King, we had, Rosa Parks. Everybody had an era that they were able to do some stuff in. Now this generation is able to do something even deeper that can take us forward. So there's an opportunity, even in the midst of what we're feeling. We have to recognize that we're not where we were, we're not where we want to be, but we're still moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. And then we are, as you said, we are in a generation who don't want to, we don't want to take over what the ancestors have, endured. We want this bleeding to stop, because we all have been infected from generation to generation. Even me, I'm African, but growing up around African people, Black people, you never see the difference until you come
here,
in city, where you can see the difference, that the color has an impact on even your group in society. The opportunity is wider for people who have light skin than me. I have to work twice harder than someone who is like another color, or like belongs to another color. And I agree with you, and I guess this generation want the change, and I believe that we are getting there. We are getting there.
Yes.
And I hope things will change.
They will. I have to believe it without a shadow of a doubt. Yes,
absolutely. I don't know if Robin has something to say about that question. Or if there is anyone, Coco, if there is anything you want to bring on the top of what she said, Nicole.
Yeah, I definitely think that change is possible. It always is possible. Just even speaking about is it hopeful? Is there still an opportunity for change? There definitely is. I think though, however, change always starts with the individual first. We can go and we want change for our community. We would want change for our workplaces and even our family, but that true change really begins within our own selves first. Really recognizing what is it that I actually want to change, because the topic on race and discrimination is quite broad, you know. It affects people in so many different ways. Like the way that it affects me may affect you differently, right? So it's recognizing that and even surrendering to that. So a few times I have some of my friends come like, how can we make a difference? How can we change? You know, even some of my white friends, like I feel terrible that like my ancestors did that, you know? So one, they're recognizing it, but two, then you gotta kind of come to that surrender piece of, okay, how can I make a difference? And with that, I really believe that forgiveness comes with that. So I'm actually going to forgive my past actions, whether that was out of ignorance or even on purpose. And healing will come from that too. So change, it's like, it's so broad. It really has to be broken down and really start with the individual first. So recognizing, surrendering to whatever faults or mistakes you have done, forgiving yourself for that, right? Even forgiving your past ancestors, and then accepting the healing that comes with that. So change, hope, it's always available. It's just up to the person on if they're going to accept it or not.
Yes, change is available. I love that. And my question, I'm going to go to Coco LaRain. And I would like to ask you like your thought on the global angers growing over George Floyd death, and on the race and social justice. What can you say as a woman, as a mother, as a sister? What do you think about this atrocity that hit all of us this past few weeks? And what is your position? What do you think about it?
Well, I think anger is the right response to wrong, right? And it's what we do with the anger that matters the most. And so there's many different levels that people are having an impact. There are people that feel called to being boots on the ground and to protest and have their voices heard. And that is important. There are people on a political scale that are fighting with Congress in the US, or that are, there's lawyers that are fighting in the courtrooms. There are, individuals in law enforcement that are trying to make changes. There are those that, so I believe that anger is important. It is a tool that we can use to voice our concerns. I think there's a collective awakening in other communities that haven't felt the pain as much because they've been busy. So I've heard so many speakers in the US talking about on the backs of COVID, when we've had more time to be at home, we haven't had as many distractions. We were all forced to see that horrific murder happen with 8 minutes and 49 seconds. We couldn't turn a blind eye to that. And so when we create awareness and we see the truth, then compassion and ownership and allyship is born, and anger is important. And we want to make sure that we harness the anger and use it to our advantage. Part of the energy of anger beautifully has created this unity that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And it's a global unity. And people are not as isolated as they think. So when you're seeing individuals from different cultures being outraged, it is coming from a place of love, because if you didn't think it was wrong, you wouldn't be angry, right? So I think anger is a beautiful thing when it is used properly. It's like fire. You can use a fire to destroy, or you can use it to warm a house. You can use it to cook food, right? Fire is very important, and anger is important if we know how to use it properly.
Absolutely. I think is a healthy anger. I think it's the right anger because we are claiming justice. We are claiming what we think is right. We are fighting for our, image, for the next generation, for even this system to stop because it's keep going, it's keep affecting. I've never been affected personally by race until I saw the George Floyd death. Like that hit me hard because you used to hear about racism, discrimination. You've been even victim in certain way in your life, and you've been watching the movie on slavery, on history. But the way it hits me this time, it was never like I never think that this racism could hit me that way. I think I, as a woman, as a sister, as a potential mother, I don't want to see or cannot even imagine my son, dying that way or any person that I loved who are dear to my heart. So it's something that really horrible for me. And I've come to the conclusion that if people don't stand and do something, every day in our ways, individually, it's something. I know that it's been more than 50 years, 100 years that these things is going, but you say something that really touched me, like you talk about the love, because we see all of us, how people went from city to city, stand up to stop these things, and from all over the world. That was the first signal that we are moving forward, like we are being heard.
Yeah, if I may continue for a moment, because you said something very powerful. I think that as a Canadian Black woman who has been in this country for 8 generations, I have been in touch with racism differently than those who grew up, let's say, in the Caribbean or in the continent of Africa. So for me, being in kindergarten and being called the N-word and feeling afraid to walk alone in the streets of Toronto, and understanding the history, it's touched me because it's something that I've lived with. I've always known and felt the pain of a George Floyd because there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of millions of Black people and Indigenous people who have suffered in this way. And so I'm not far removed from it. So I don't feel this awakening the way that others would. And I don't believe that African Americans or Black Americans who have seen it every day when they're walking to school and they see their brothers or their cousins or their sisters being shot and killed, they've seen this type of atrocity for numerous years. And then the other Black people in the diaspora and other cultures are seeing it, and it feels like it's a bit of the first time for them, seeing it in real life. But they're those of us who've seen it. My brother was beat up by the cops when he was a teenager, and there was a thing that the cops in Toronto would take kids to, I think it was Q Beach back in the day, and beat them up before they were, arrested them. I had an experience with racism when I was in a taxi with my daughter who was 6 months old with an asthma attack, and the cops stopped us and made me get out of the taxi cab and didn't believe that my daughter was having an asthma attack and she could have died, and I had to go and hail down another taxi cab to go there. This has been the history of my people here in this country and in America. And so on one sense, I'm grateful that the rest of the world is sort of getting a chance to see what we've always seen and to feel what we've always felt. But I'm also kind of surprised that anybody I'm still kind of surprised that anybody should be surprised, because this is not anything new. This is old news. But again, at the same time, I'm grateful, right?
Yes, absolutely. We are all grateful and hopeful, and that things will change, because the person who are more sensible and who are less stronger than adults is the younger generation. It's children. It's also women. Because we are naturally we have maternal instinct, and we naturally a mother. But it's more difficult to handle for those category of people, women and children. So Robin, as a mental health educator, what do you think about how you think that we can prevent the devastating effects of this race and discrimination aspect on mental health? How can we reduce the effect or even prevent the effect?
Well, I think for one is education. Just period, like in the Black community, I can only speak in the Canadian Black community, we're lacking big time of educating ourselves on mental health. So just imagine our youth, they barely know anything. So for myself, I personally didn't watch that video. I probably watched about 4 or 5 seconds of the George Floyd video because I'm thinking about my own mental health. I've been locked up for about 3 months in quarantine, what that does to me. And all of a sudden this video comes on that I know is going to be traumatic. Why? Because there's past generation of that kind of behavior done towards my family. So I knew that if I watched this video, it was going to be traumatic for me, especially as somebody that has seen death before. I don't want to see it again. You know, just as Coco just mentioned, this is nothing new. So I think educating our youth on how the stuff that we view on social media impacts our mental health. You know, we talk a lot about with girls and when they're viewing Instagram posts and videos and how that affects their self-esteem, but how is that affecting you mentally when you've been inside, like quarantined for so long with no communication and all that you're doing is just scrolling through your phone and then something traumatic comes up? And what are the emotions that come from that? Like Coco mentioned, anger, there's fear that will come from that. Sometimes even a depression as well. So I think we have to start educating. Again, I go back to change starts with the individual first. If you're a parent, like have those conversations with your children on how social media will affect your mental health, how watching somebody die right in front of you is going to affect you. You're not going to watch that video and walk away happy. It's going to trigger some type of emotion. So thankfully, like for myself, that's part of my role of educating you. I knew 6 seconds in, I'm not watching this video. This is something that continues to happen in the United States. So I'm not going to subject myself to more trauma. What can I do? I can educate people on, okay, this is an injustice that's been going on for a long time, and how can we move forward? But it's just the same as you wouldn't bring your 10-year-old to go see a rated R movie because the effects on that. So definitely we need to start educating our youth on their mental health and how these things trigger different emotions and how those emotions will now trigger different actions and responses from us. Like we see with violence, we see with people kind of bullying others online. All of that has to do with that first emotion that's been triggered. So yeah.
Wow.
And if I can jump in for a second, just to pick up on what Robin is saying, you know, because the preventative is so important, but it's what you do as well daily, recognizing that this is actual trauma. And like when I said, we're bleeding while leading, we're in this constant state of mourning, which means that we're in grief, especially as Black people, Black Canadians, no matter what part of the continent you're from, your history speaks to that. And sometimes we may not recognize that we are actually in a stage of grief. So grief comes with anger, and Coco spoke about anger. Then there can be sadness, then there can be joy, then there can be just, you know, you don't even recognize when you can get triggered. Because I like what Robin said, she recognized that it's knowing yourself. She recognized that if I look at this, it can bring me to a place of trauma. And we have to recognize that there's a mental illness and there's mental health. So, and we have to make sure that we differentiate between the two. Right now, a lot of people have to think of their mental health before they end up in an illness. So if they do not take care of what they're putting into their minds, what they're watching, what they're listening to, what they're doing, actively getting out, and if you can't get out with friends, doing stuff for yourself, whether you go take a walk, and see who you're talking to. Your friends are very important in this time, and making sure that, especially as young people, and I like when Robin said, if you're scrolling and just looking at your Facebook and your Twitter and this, you can get sucked into the rabbit hole. Which rabbit hole are you going to get sucked into? If you're going to be doing protests in the midst of COVID, how can you do it safely? So that you're actually affecting change, but not adding to your own mental and physical health. Because even right now, I love the fact that people are going out there, and Coco said it, that everybody's going to behave differently, but we have to be wise in this moment of time, and getting educated what mental health is, getting educated as to what a mental illness is. So earlier you mentioned being bipolar, schizophrenia, those are illnesses. And then you can have different levels of depression, because it's very easy with what we've just experienced with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the list is endless. Even just looking at the trial yesterday, the results of the trial yesterday for Devontae Miller, that's adding some layers to the trauma. So we have to have some healthy conversations and not just complain about things. I think we have to be solution oriented and find some positive solutions, and not just always be combative. We have to have some balance in life.
Yes, absolutely. So do you think, you or Robin thinks that there is enough of works that has been applied in schools, in college, middle schools? Do you think that racism is something that it's people are educated on the story, in schools, to know, anything about the race, discrimination, the colors? Do you think the work is more done by association or community organization for mental health, or we need to implement that in schools also, or what do you think?
If I can just jump in there, I think it definitely needs to be implemented in schools. Like, a part of my job is going into schools and doing these different type of crisis counseling. And I don't think I've really ever seen race and discrimination be attached to that, and how, somebody seeking mental health that's Black or Chinese, how that might be different for them. We're doing really good at bringing in outside resources, having different weeks and awareness in our schools, but not really talking about how that might look different with each individual. I think a lot of that's coming from communities, even like conversations like we're having right now. But I think for sure, like, the schools could definitely add a bit more diversity even within the conversation on mental health. So a lot of the times, like, youth will come to me and be like, oh, wow, like, I never knew, like, there's still that stigma out there of thinking it's a white person thing, So even if a community agency is going to come into the school, or if you're going to do a conversation in the school, like, make sure that it's diverse, and even having conversations on the present discrimination that's within the mental health system too. So I think we have like a ways to go, but we're getting there, but we just need to start educating more and adding more faces to that education.
And I'm gonna defer. I mean, like, I will address the question, but I know Coco, since I've known Coco for I won't say how many years. That might age us, Coco? If I say how many years we know each other. But I know Coco from going into the school systems and speaking on race and mental health. But definitely mental health is not addressed anywhere in terms of really teaching it. I mean, just for us as adults, we're still mixing up, even just in the acronyms of health versus illnesses. And our community is guilty of that. And even how we refer to things. And even the medical community is guilty of it, because the shame that comes with having a mental health problem or being referred to having a mental illness problem is so huge. So far less for anyone even addressing it in schools. We talk about cancer, we will teach about diabetes, how to, you know, be fit, but we don't talk about the mental piece of it. But, you know, this is my topic, so I can talk for hours, but I'm gonna throw it to Nicole, Coco, because she has been one of the boots on the ground going into some schools. So Coco, I'm throwing it to you.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of outside agencies. I've been working in the schools for a number of years, over about 27 years now, and I do talk about mental wellness and health, and many administrators invited me into the classroom to talk about self-esteem and personal development and anti-bullying and, of course, Black history. And and although I love my work, 5 workshops, a workshop once a week is not enough. I think it needs to be instituted into the curriculum. I think there needs to be an overhaul completely in terms of how we are teaching our students. And I'm not sure if I'm trying to be careful with my language here, but I'm not sure if the powers that be are prepared to really institute the kind of educational overhaul that we need to ensure that our children are adequately prepared to live in the society and understand mental health. I think that they have some challenges, and the education system impacts the mental health of particularly Black students in terms of the way it's structured. In terms of the way they're showing up in the classroom on a daily basis. So it is a huge problem, and there needs to be overhauls in many different institutions, from education to obviously policing to you know, every institution, medical institution. We all need to be re-educated, and there needs to be a complete overhaul, in my opinion, of our education system as it pertains to anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, as it pertains to mental health and wellness and mental illness, you name it. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Okay. So there is a lot of work being said that we need to, like schools also need to implement strategy or programs to help, you know, people of color or who are like anything that can touch the mental health in a discrimination level.
I think all cultures need to be educated, not just because we're saying, oh, we're going to teach our Black kids. Well, every single child, regardless of what color of skin they have, because I believe we are all people of color because we all have colors on our skin. We're othering each other, but every single student and every single staff person, anybody working in the education system and being taught, they need an educational overhaul.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your answer. So what do you ladies think about the solution that we can bring, like as a community leaders? What is the solution that we can implement, or the tools that we can provide to women and younger generation to, you know, to tackle all these situations, anything concerning the race and discrimination and the negative effect on the health? What do you think that we should, what is the solution? I heard Nicole saying that she has a lot of solution, that she has a list of solution today for us, but if all of you have something to say, you know, you are free to speak too. So. Nicole?
Oh, it was going to be me. I was going to let Coco and Robin speak because I think I've spoken so much, and, you know, it's such a passion of mine. And but I think education, it first starts with education, and it first starts with education in the home, because it's one thing to have education outside, but it's about us educating ourselves, us equipping our families, ensuring whether we are, you know, Coco said it wisely, you know, everybody has to be educated, making sure the books are in the home that speak to all levels of history. I grew up in Trinidad, so we learned world history. So I was very shocked when I came to Canada when I was like 18, 19, and I was like, and my sisters who were younger going to school, and I couldn't understand that they weren't getting a full view of world history. They didn't know certain things that we grew up knowing in the Caribbean. And so I think it really starts first in the home when it comes to race, culture, and about world history. And also, we also need to educate ourselves when we look on the mental health piece, learning about mental health, learning about mental illnesses, and finding the tools on how to be healthy. We take the time with exercise and taking the shame out of the game. Keeping it real that, you know what, mommy's not having a good day today, and it's okay if mommy needs to sleep. I have certain friend who will be named nameless who will tell me, Nicole, it's okay if you're tired today and you need to rest. That nameless friend is Coco, who will say, Nicole, it's okay to take a minute, to take a time out because you're tired. And especially now when you're going through so much stress, we have to learn how to take those timeouts for ourselves to regenerate. And that's just one out of many, but I know Robin and Coco have some to throw in there as well.
Yeah, Nicole, I definitely agree with you on the education piece. I think that's really important. I also think it's important that we educate without stigma, because I find a lot of the times in the homes when that education is being done, and you know, a lot of it is lack of knowledge, or you know, something was done in their home country, but there can still be like a lot of stigma involved in the education that's coming from the home. So I think it's really important that parents and caregivers like get the correct information regarding mental health and mental illness, just how you differentiated between the two. Because for example, for myself, growing up in a Jamaican household, anything that had to do with mental health is, you know, you're sick in your head, oh, you're crazy, those kind of things, right? And that stigma, like that's nothing to do with it, you know? Loved how you explained how it's okay for a mommy to have like a day where she just needs to rest and whatnot. So the education piece is really important, but I think like families, we need to really eliminate the stigma that we're attaching when we educate our kids. And the internet is there, there's videos, there's conversations like this where we can learn. I think as well, being a bit more open, like I find once you talk to somebody else and you're like, well, yeah, you know, I've kind of gone through the same thing, and oh my days, like it's not actually like this, like I'm not sick in my head, I'm not crazy, and all that kind of stuff. So really kind of being able to relate mental health to physical health on like the same level without any of that stigma is really, really, really important for sure.
And Robin, you said that word crazy, and that word drives me crazy.
Yes.
It's a word that I wish we could just eliminate.
Yes.
I wish, especially in the Caribbean, I don't know, Coco, for you, I don't know, you know, on the continent, but this word crazy is just so overused. And, you know, I'm going to use my Trini accent for a minute.
Yes.
What's wrong with her? She crazy or what? And it's something somebody has done that is silly, but it makes reference to their actions. And then it creates that taboo. And I think we have to relanguage ourselves in certain words that we say, because we've made an illness that is very serious and very real become taboo. It's almost like you're wrong to have a mental illness, and we do not prescribe the same things to any other illness. And that for me is a challenge. And I know in the Caribbean and Trinidad, they will say, well, she not well, you need to put her, this is how we put it in, and I hope you don't understand my Trinidadian accent, I will translate. She gone to the madhouse, we're gonna put her in the madhouse. And I'm like, the madhouse? No, she's gone to the mental health hospital to get some help. We don't call it the whatever connotation for when somebody has cancer, but whenever it's something to do with our, and mental illness, let me say this before I throw to Coco, it's a brain disease. It's not a mind disease. It's an illness that affects our brain, that affects the chemicals in the brain, that can affect somebody acting differently. And so we have to be very, I think if we change and shift it, that it's not, I can think my illness away depending on what it is. it's a brain disease. You don't ask somebody to think their cancer away or to think their diabetes away. You have to get help depending on what you're dealing with. Anyways, I'm going to shut up. Coco, it's your turn, girl.
Yeah, well, I think, I think we have said so much today, and I remember you all saying when you're taking care of your mental health, you're going to be careful what you're watching and what you're not going to watch, especially when it comes to this. For me, I'm sort of the opposite of the two of you. I've watched everything online, and I feel like those of us, we have to check our capacity levels and understand what we have, what do I have the capacity for, right? And couple that with self-care. So because I know as an advocate, as a speaker, that I don't have the luxury of turning away. There's in my heart, which may not work for anybody else, but in my heart, if the people that are experiencing that trauma and being murdered, that their neighbors and their sisters and their mothers or their brothers don't have the luxury of turning away and closing a blind eye, then neither should I. But I have a capacity that may be different than others, and what I'm called to is different than someone else. Whereas as an advocate, as someone who's going to speak about these issues, and I have a program called Grieving with Grace, and so I face trauma. I'm dealing with that's sort of part of the work that I do, working with women who have been traumatized in a rape crisis center in York Region, and so for me, because I'm boots on the ground and do not turn away because of the work that I do, my self-care is vital. Right, where I have to take more naps than probably the average person may want to take during their day. I have to make sure that that I'm eating well. And there's different self-care tips and strategies. We need to make self-care part of our lifestyle, and recognize, so even though I watch a lot of things, I don't have a TV, I don't watch the news, I'm very careful who I'm listening to, and where I'm getting the information from. And I'm recognizing when I'm spending time with my grandchildren, that's a very special time. I'm recognizing the power of music. Self-soothing is also key. When I'm feeling really stressed, I'll stimulate all of my senses. So here's something that we could advise, where you smell something, taste something, touch something, look at something, and listen to something all at the same time, as I'm experiencing the hurt and the pain that I'm going through, as a way to relax my nervous system, to relax and to breathe. So as the tears come, I'm beginning to learn to rest, because I may not be going through the trauma, but I'm witnessing the trauma, or I'm remembering the trauma, and the body can feel like it's going through it all over again. So as I remember trauma or I witness trauma, I need to make sure that I'm learning to relax my nervous system, to breathe, to soothe those senses, so I can watch it without that tension and without that trauma that can lead to that mental health challenges that we're talking about. I want to make sure the chemicals in my brain are not being completely, like too much cortisol and too much stress hormones are being released in my brain when I watch those videos, right? I'm noticing that my body is getting tense, and this is what causes illness in the body. So I have to recognize that if I have to watch it or if I don't watch it, how am I taking care of my body and my mind and my thoughts? I'm arresting those thoughts. And then a second thing that I would say is putting your pain to action. One of the things that happens when our trauma gets stuck in our bodies because we can't fight back. So how do you fight back? If everybody watching this sends a $5 donation to the young boy, you said his name earlier, Devontae Miller. If we all spent $5, $10, $15, $20 on the GoFundMe campaign for Devontae Miller, then that's me putting my pain into action. That's me doing something, right? Where I'm calling my leaders and saying we want to ensure that police are held accountable and that kind of thing. So even though we're caring for ourselves, there are ways that we can start to care for our community. There are ways that we can start to begin to so that we can take that anger and take that pain and turn it into power. So that's sort of what I think, because it's not just enough to take care of me. How can I take care of my community? How could I take care? And then to check on those people. Nicole, you always say that. Check on the people that are hurting the most, that are the ones that look the strongest, right? There are a lot of people, boots on the ground, that are out there doing the work. We need to check on them and make sure they're okay, and and see that they're okay, that they just need a shoulder to cry on, or somebody to listen, or somebody to send them some love, or bake a casserole or something for them, so yeah, that's what I would say.
I think you should double check. I just want to pause a second. Okay, did we stop, or did our live stop all of a sudden on Facebook?
We are still on live.
Okay. It kind of looked like it stopped for a minute, but I wanted to pick up on something, Coco said, in terms of even like, it's so funny. And I'm going to touch on two things because, and I'll start with the last piece first. When we ask someone, how are you doing today? It's just like how we came online. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we don't stop and listen to what the person isn't saying. And I know with Robin and Coco being practitioners, they have to really stop and listen when they go into a school, for instance, and dealing with young people, to really hear the nonverbal answer. And we as individuals need to listen to the nonverbal answers that young people are giving us and that we are giving to ourselves, and be aware of when we are shutting down. And then I'm going to go back to the earlier when Coco referenced about the self-care and the self-soothing, even just in preparing for this. Because you never know where a conversation like this is going to go, right? And how deep we're going to go, and if anybody's going to be triggered. And so I made sure, I remembered, okay, let me put on the candle so I have a scent going. I'm in the house by myself, but I literally put on perfume so that, I can stimulate my senses. And I put on something that is in front of me that I like to look at. So I made sure that even just in having this conversation, that the atmosphere that I was creating around me could help boost my energy, because after you guys leave me, I'm by myself. So I need to make sure that I am fortified at the same time. So I think we all need to do that and have a drink. Like I'm drinking, made sure I had a fun drink in my healthy cup. It's ginger ale, but that's my fun drink. And that was for me, So it's being mindful of those little things as well.
Yeah, I think it's great that you guys both, Nicole and Coco, touched on the self-care piece, because even looking at it from like a youth perspective, a lot of that is lacking as well. Knowing how to just take care of yourself. And as Coco was even talking about, recognizing those body signals, those signals that your body's giving you, my heart's racing, my stomach's starting to turn, and all of those different things. A lot of the times, like, our youth are not recognizing that, and then they're ending up watching something that, fuels an emotion to go somewhere else. So I think it's important as well to be educating our youth on self-care, whether that's in the school, in the homes, in our communities, in our churches. It's very important, and as well for them to like recognize those body signals. Like, thank you, Coco, for bringing that up, because it's so important, and it's often doesn't go noticed, or it's often is not quite paid attention to. So it's really important.
And I think the other piece too, as I just thought about something you and Coco said. You're going into the schools and the young people are dealing with race, and so I would ask you guys, what advice? Like, and I think of even, because you're our hostess, but you're young, and when you're faced with racial discrimination, whether you're going for a job or you're in school and you want to go for that class, and the teacher tells you, well, instead of going for, one level of math, they put you in the lower level of math because they think you're not smart enough, and they have to come home and deal with that, and they may not have the parental support. How do we, I sometimes wonder, because I have one son, and I'm not raising a girl, and I think raising girls are different than boys, yet there's some similarities. I know Coco has girls, but what advice do we really give to young people dealing with racism and especially some of them are now starting jobs, and it's the first time they may be going for a job interview? I think of those things. How do they handle that pushback when dealing with, racism? I'm throwing it out to you guys because I'm sitting quiet on this one.
First, okay, go Coco.
Yeah, if you had something to say, Robin, by all means.
Okay. I was just going to share from like a personal experience. I think what would have been helpful for myself is, again, like that education in the home, like knowing you may experience this and whatnot. But I don't know, this may be a bit off topic, but it's just something that I remember when I was working in a school, and a lot of the youth that I work with, like they have their own differences. And I remember as a staff, like this student just repeatedly called me the N-word while walking up and down the hall, up and down the hall, up and down the hall, the N-word, the N-word, the N-word, the N-word, over and over and over again. And as a staff member, like it's been a few years now, right? So I kind of, I guess, have already like guarded, put up that wall to that word. What I was more concerned about was the students around me. And a lot of the times, this is just me guessing, like we haven't really have taught youth how to react when that happens. You know, there was another incident at that same school where we had a group of white kids just terribly like using all of these names against a group that we had in the school going for newcomers and whatnot. And how do they actually deal with that? So it goes back to the education piece. Like, at least for myself, I was able to say, you know what, this student has, you know, his own challenges and whatnot. But what about the other youth and the staff members who that was kind of their first time seeing racism right in front of them to that level? Personally, for me, I would have loved to have seen that school react a bit differently. There was a suspension, but that's it. There wasn't a conversation on why we don't use this word, you know, why we are treating everybody with respect, you know, even that talk of history. I know Nicole was talking about the history she learned in Trinidad. As a young person growing up in the Canadian school system, I barely learned anything about my own Black history. When Black History Month came around, it was a time for everybody to jump up and rave during the high school assemblies, and reggae music was going on. Nobody talked about our forefathers and mothers who were leaders and who helped build this nation, you know? So I think a lot of education needs to happen. And I think as well, the adults, especially in the school system, it can't just be okay, we're just gonna suspend. Like, conversations need to happen on why this is not okay. I don't know if that answers the question, but it was really an experience that I have had a few times. Even trying to get certain jobs, I know that I unfortunately have to speak a certain way, or I have to come into the place of employment a certain way, and it shouldn't have to be like that, you know? But instead, there's always this front stigma of, oh, she's Black, so she's gonna be loud, she's gonna be crazy, she's gonna be ghetto, all of these different things. And it shouldn't be like that at all. But unfortunately, it is. So it has been quite difficult for myself. I will be honest, it's been quite difficult for myself, even navigating in even kindergarten classrooms, where we are well into the 20th century and kids are coming and asking me, why is my skin dark? Like, wow. Like, where is the education in all of this, right? So again, going back, just as Coco talked about those body signals and knowing, okay, this is affecting me because it's coming from a place of when I was younger. But this is also not okay because we are well into the 20th century. Why are kids still wondering why my skin is dark? Why is it okay, even if this kid has differences, to repeatedly call me the N-word? Why is it okay for a group of students to be using derogatory, that's a high-tech word, language that is not, you know, appropriate against these newcomers? So again, like education, because I don't understand why staff would think just a suspension is okay. Like there needs to be conversation and education about our differences and about those who are in our communities.
Yeah, and I think we have to understand that the education system was, in and of itself, and our whole society, you cannot be raised in North America and come out, or even across the globe, and not come out with implicit bias, with prejudice, with discriminatory ideas, just based on a white supremacy, just based on the issues of the day, and unfortunately, fortunately for us, because people are listening, there is some much more education around the impact of colonialism and white supremacy and how that is taught. If you look at the map in and of itself, right, the continent of Africa is drawn in smaller than North America, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's so from the beginning of kindergarten, when you walk into your kindergarten class and you see the map of the world, Africa is smaller. And then when they share the only images of poverty with respect to Africa, your mind is being conditioned to think. When you say words like third world countries, what are you talking about? Africa is the richest continent on the planet. There's nothing third world about it, unless you're going to talk about how colonialism made it into a third world country. So we have to have a whole dialogue about the impact, the way that our identities have been completely stolen from faith-based communities, from who our ancestors really were, and the impact of slavery, the impact of colonialism, the impact of whitewashing our history. It goes, the rabbit hole goes so deep. It's in every facet of our society. And so for us to really be pulled out of that, it's been passed down from generation to generation unknowingly. And there's an entitlement and a sense of superiority and white fragility that we're fighting against, that we're not even really aware of. And then there's so much shame attached to this conversation as well, because when we're calling somebody a racist, we have to understand what racism is. Racism is a system, not a person. And then there's prejudice, and then so you're right, absolutely right when you say education is key, but we have to understand what type of education are we talking about here. If a map was specifically drawn to illustrate that the beautiful continent of Africa is smaller than, then we have so much unlearning to do before we can start the learning process, right? And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. And then people being so attached, right? So now you're having to deal with the white savior complex, right? And so, yes, we have beautiful allies in the white community that are coming on board. They're being awakened and seeing this, but then you have to be careful that it's not, I'm going to be the white person that saves the day. And we think about how much we've been inundated with superheroes and, the James Bonds of the world. They come in and they save the day. And you have a black sidekick who's, doing his thing, what I'm saying? He's right with you and he's funny. Yo, I got you. But is he really the hero? Where's the first hero that we had? It was the Black Panther. And so we're not seeing ourselves represented in our history properly. We are glorifying slavery, and not even telling the truth of how slavery actually was, where babies were fed to alligators. We're not talking about the impact of the way that people were lynched, and that lynching still happens and has been happening this whole time in America. But for the systems have been forced to say that whenever you find somebody hanging from a tree or something, that you have to call it a suicide. And so lynchings have never stopped in America. There's lynchings here. Canada had slavery. People were, so we have to unlearn a lot of stuff in order for us to learn the truth, in order for us to actually grow. And a lot of times you don't even know what we're fighting. We don't even know the impact of of our psyche, of why a young child would say, why am I dark skinned? So absolutely, I'll leave it there. There's so much more that I can say.
Wow, I love everything you said, and Coco, you talk about the fact that we must know ourselves, we must pay attention to some things. It's something that is important because, you know, some people are, and also the fact that you said that we should take care of people, we should, you know, go to them, we should call to see how they are doing. You know, that's the in the part of the solution. We must do those actions because some people are introverts. Some people don't know the pain, their anxiety. They are not expressive people. So they deal with internally until it hits the brain, until it becomes an illness, you know? And this is something that it just opened my mind because, you know, we talk about this mental health issue, but we have to also consider that we are different and some people can handle differently. The same way children can handle like, you know, in a different manner, the same way that adult people who cannot express their feeling or are not used to express their feeling or more introvert can deal with that differently. And you can see that in their everyday life, you know, they can show anxiety, stress in their action, being anger, but there is a problem that needs to be touched. And you just need to talk, you know, having this type of conversation more often in different communities so people can express their feelings. And also, I think that you spoke about the image that, you know, people think of Africa, like when you speak about Africa directly, you know, the image that come to people's mind is poverty. I guess that even in some Black community, like Robin says, they are loud, they are gang, they use drugs, because media also, I think that the media has a big role to play, you know, for the change that we want to see. We need the media also, you know, there is a big role that they need to play as well, because, you know, the image that they have been releasing for African American people or Black people, it's always negative. It's always negative. So people's brain are formatted, and to see Black, you know, whenever you be in a contact of a Black person, you look at the way they're dressing, you don't even trying to know them like deeply, to see, you know, be in love with the personality of what the person has to give instead of it's outside, because this is color that we don't choose, right? Even when you go to find a job, you can see that I don't like that part. When you are feeling with a job, you are applying, you have to say if you're a person of color, if you're what type of color you are. I think even in company, we must eradicate that, because we are all human. We are different color, of course. We cannot, you know, ignore that. It's a reality. But even that can be, you know, why do I have to always, you know, put on paper if I'm a Black person, if I'm Indian, if I'm white, why? What it can change in my performance, in my capacity that I can bring in a company, you know?
You know, and anybody who asks you that for applying for a job, they're doing something illegal, because they're not supposed to ask you your ethnicity when you're applying for a job. They can ask you your ethnicity if you're doing some race-based data or something that is pertinent maybe to a hospital or something, but for a job, unless I'm missing here, I didn't even know they were allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah, sometimes it's the company trying to fill a quota. So, we don't have a diverse organization. So what they'll do is they'll ask in the application and then sometimes push your name to the front because you're going to fill that quota. And I think that's terrible. I would rather you hire me for my skills and not my race because you're trying to fill a quota. It's the same thing where right now, you know, it's great we're seeing, you know, Uber Eats and all these other companies push Black-owned businesses, but it's like, I would actually prefer you support my business and buy things from my business because you like it, you like what you see, and it's not just because society is kind of forcing you to support me. So a lot of it is to fill a quota, and again, like, hire me because of my skills, hire me because you think I will be a good fit for the team. Don't hire me because you're trying to fill a quota to make your organization look better.
Well, and I understand the sentiment of what you're saying, but I also recognize that hiring practices are not fair, and if left to their own devices, some people who definitely have racist bias. Well, the system is racist, and then they have their own bias that we would never even get a seat at the table. So what we're doing is we're saying we deserve a seat at the table, hire diverse individuals from different backgrounds that are qualified for the role. So I think it's important for us to recognize that that we deserve a seat at the table, and if we have to demand that seat, then we have to demand that seat because our people did build this country, and especially in the United States. And so even though it seems like they're hiring us because we're Black, no, I'm still qualified, but I'm being hired because you're actually allowing my resume to be on the table, and rightfully so. If it was equal across the board and they would hire based on qualifications, then we wouldn't have this problem in the first place. The problem is that they're not hiring, right? So that's why I think filling a quota is an awful way of saying that, but we're looking for equality, we're looking for equity right now, and there's a difference between equity and equality. And so by ensuring that more diverse individuals from different backgrounds have access to the hiring, that's an equity issue, I think, more than just equality. Equality doesn't work in certain cases because of the disparities that we've experienced at the Black community, because we were slaves for so many years. So we are owed reparations that we need to get. That's a whole other conversation.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for all your answer. It's it's really empowering myself, and then I guess this will not only help people that is watching us or will watch us in the replay, but even myself. The more that I'm hearing is empowering me. It's helping me as well. And thank you so much. You are all amazing. Thank you. I have a question that just come in, and the question is from Janana, and she says, mental health is often viewed as taboo within the Black communities. Is there something that happened in your life that triggered your involvement in what you are doing today?
So for me, it's layered. It's understanding my own health. Understanding that when I had a son, going through life and changes, depression, and dealing with depression. And I remember I didn't even realize I was depressed until I think one day I saw someone, was a Black woman on TV talking on 100 Huntley Street. And when she spoke about her journey, it clicked. And taking charge of what I was putting into my mind, what I was doing, and then also being honest with myself, and then having friends who were real and wanting to be honest. And then the second part of it was 5 years ago, my son was in a bike accident, and that caused a series of events. And so we have had to be involved in the mental health system. And I now sit on a committee at CAMH for caregivers for loved ones who are dealing with a mental illness, and also sitting on a couple more committees there even dealing with anti-Black racism at CAMH. And so the mental health piece has become very pivotal for me. And then also having family members with mental illnesses and recognizing that growing up, we didn't know what the diagnosis was because, I think of an aunt and an uncle and we didn't know what the diagnosis was. But now in hindsight, as I got older and people are now talking about it, we know that, this is where it was in the family. And it's important to know that history, the same way that we go and say, okay, is there cancer in your family? Is there heart disease? Is there diabetes? We need to know this because it can also, I believe it can really help in the prevention of where someone could be in their mental wellness. Because sometimes we may say, okay, this child is just being rambunctious or whatever else, but they may be dealing with something, or a child may be actually in depression and we're not addressing it and just saying that they're moody. So I know in the Caribbean, we would use the word, oh, a child is just being moody, but we're not paying attention to the little signs that this young person could, and no matter what age, a child could be depressed at age 2, 3, 5. And so we just toss it aside as, oh, it's just growing pains. And we need to pay attention because when we see some young people commit suicide and stuff like that, it's because we didn't know what we should pay attention to. And we also make people feel guilty. And suicide is a big topic and we probably need to deal with that another day. But suicide is one of those things that people say it's a selfish act, but it's not a selfish act because when somebody commits suicide, is that they're escaping pain. There's a pain that is so big and there's a darkness that is so real that they cannot even, they see themselves more as a problem. They actually see themselves leaving this earth as a solution to their loved ones. So it's really important that we really get on the board of understanding what mental health and mental illness is, because it's really going to make us better, especially as Black people, because we have not dealt with it as a community for so long. And we have a right to have some mental health issues, let me tell you. We have a right to have some because we've been stressed for a long time.
Absolutely.
Just saying.
And quickly, just to add on what you said, like in our community, it's not something that we spoke about. I came in Canada, I was very young, and I was in my early 20s, very young, and I went through a lot of things, and I went through depression.
Mm-hmm.
And depression, like the only things I wanted was to put an end of my life. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to die. I tried to go out of the street, to stand in front of the car. I remember I had a friend at that time that was used to call the cop because it was worried, like where she's going. I was going through a lot. Mm-hmm. That the only thing you want is just to end up with the pain, because mm-hmm. you are dealing with alone, living alone, young. You don't know what is mental health about. You never hear that when you were growing up, because in my country, the only people we see, it's crazy people on the street.
Yeah. So
mental health is related to being crazy. Is that
and that's when the illness has not been dealt with. Exactly. When the illness has not been dealt with and somebody ends up on the street, it's because they are called crazy because they're acting oddly, they're acting outside of the behavior. Absolutely. And so whether you became depressed, and one of the things that people should know is a young person, especially with young people, bipolar and schizophrenia can happen like this. Like if a young person, for instance, especially when they're beneath 25 and they smoke cannabis with high THC levels, they can become bipolar and schizophrenic like this. And because we do not understand the illness and because of how the mental health system is rigged and laid out in Canada, a person with a mental health illness may not get the treatment that they need because of the parameters. I'm trying to be very careful with my words, of the parameters that are put in place there. So like when you were talking about not feeling yourself, being depressed, wanting to just stop it, you don't know where to go because who do you ask, right? And you're told if you go into that place, you're the connotation of, especially coming from the continent and the Caribbean, it's always that crazy. And we, in the continent and in the Caribbean, there's a level of education that we need, they make us go to, that you say, you must have this degree and stuff like that. But go ahead, I think I interrupted you.
No, I was just adding on the top of what you said is like, exactly, you give it, you explain it clearly. Like, if you don't know where to go, if you don't have any support, if even your parents can even think that it's something, oh, you are just, it's life, life is up and down, but life is up and down. But for a younger person, immigrating in a country very young, where you have to reformat your way of thinking, being independent, like doing everything alone without your parent around, growing with your parent, and then suddenly you have to live by yourself. You have to do everything by yourself. You have to face a situation by yourself. You have to deal, with the situation alone. And you don't know where to go, because as an immigrant, you don't know where to knock. I remember one day when they sent me to the hospital, the first thing they wanted to know if I'm crazy. I saw the police laughing at me, and then it was horrible what's happening to me. They wanted to keep me at the hospital, like giving me medicine, a lot of stuff. But I also needed, more human, counseling, more human assistance than, because it was a childhood trauma that I was carrying until I grew up, and then it exploded. So I agree with everything you said, and we definitely need to implement that in schools, in family conversations, giving opportunity to young kids to speak about that to their parents freely, without feeling judged or crazy, right?
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Because it was your story is so powerful, and I think that I relate to. I had a mental health challenges. I was diagnosed, but not until I was in my 40s, with generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And it was something that I lived with throughout my entire life, but wasn't aware of. And the anxiety was my normal, right? So, it wasn't until I started to really do the work and help others, and then I was recognizing what was going on with me. Why was I having these continuous attacks? I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't get the diagnosis. And then one day, I knew there was something, I just didn't have the name for it, I should say, until my 40s. And I remember talking to my girlfriend and saying, sometimes I just feel like going into the hospital and getting help. And my girlfriend said, well, you've been coping, and you've been coping well all these years, but why don't you just go? Why don't you stop coping and just go in and tell them what's wrong? And I did. I walked right across, I live in the downtown core, I walked right across the street to the hospital, and I didn't do the things that I normally do to cope. I didn't, I just let myself in the moment show exactly what I was feeling. I walked into the emergency room and I said, I think I'm having a mental health break. I let myself cry. I let myself feel for the first time unapologetically. And it felt really weird because I was like, what's going to happen when I get there? Are they going to keep me? And they realized, okay, because I took ownership of it and I said, I think I need help. That's when they gave me the medication, and they said, and it made me go and see a doctor, and I was able to talk. And I walked in there unapologetically and unashamed, right? One of the things that makes mental health issues and mental illnesses taboo, unfortunately, is the faith-based community, because we think that we can pray it away, or we think that it's a demonic oppression, and we think it's bad behavior, again, because of lack of education. And then also, historically speaking, Black people were experimented on, and by doctors, especially Black women, And we were taught, don't trust doctors, don't trust them, don't go see them, because they knew, like when you think about the Tuskegee Airmen and the tests with syphilis and things like that, back in our recent history, Black women in particular, Black men, Black children were used as guinea pigs, right? There were Black women that used to test all the equipment with respect to women's health and that kind of thing. The only reason why, what's that piece of medical equipment that we use when we're giving women a pap smear? The only reason why that exists is because of the experimentation on Black women's bodies. And so we were taught by our ancestors, recent ancestors, never go to the doctor, don't trust them, because they knew what was happening. And they just built this, don't go. They built in this fear. Well, the story of what was happening to Black people was silenced, but the fear remained, the fear of getting the help and support. And so that's why you think it's not just mental health issues that were not readily addressed, but how many people actually will go to the doctor in the moment, right? Then when the treatment that we get when we go to the hospital, because there's this notion that's being taught that Black people don't feel the same amount of pain that white people do, especially, Black women and Black men in particular. My own son experienced some trauma and was not believed by the doctors. And I remember watching him have an asthma attack in the hospital room, and the nurse was saying, I don't think you're having an asthma attack. I just don't think you are. And so we're being pushed away. We're facing racism in the system. So getting help from a system that is racist against you or prejudiced or that doesn't value your pain is also what's pushing people away. So we have to recognize that it's a very deep issue from a historical perspective, from a racial perspective, from a spiritual perspective, and then again from a personal perspective, where pain has been so normalized in our community. We're not paying attention to our own hurts. We're dissociating from it, so it's pretty deep.
Yeah, I can definitely relate with some of the things that Coco and Nicole have mentioned. For myself, it was quite difficult growing up. I didn't realize until probably in my later teens, I was diagnosed with depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder. And I didn't know anything about it, I had to go to Google, why am I feeling this way? Because again, not a lot of people around me were talking about it, not even in my schools. It wasn't until I went to a presentation and I heard Megan, a speaker, and I actually speak for that same organization today, share her story. And I was just like, whoa, that's exactly what I'm experiencing and whatnot. But just as Coco mentioned, a lot of the lack of education within faith-based communities, being a part of a church that was really saying, oh, we need to pray this away, it's demonic and all of that stuff, and the shame that brings onto one person, So here I was just kind of, a young person by myself. I can't really talk to my parents because they're from a Jamaican background and they have their own stigmas, and kind of navigating this mental health system on my own. And I think that's what really brought me into the work that I do today, is to kind of make sure, try my best that doesn't happen to another youth like me. When I was asked to start to go into schools and do presentations, the first thing I was just like, hell no, somebody's gonna see me from my church, somebody's gonna see me like a family relative, and they're gonna say this and that, and rumors start and whatnot. But I'll never forget, I think it was probably about my third presentation, I had a Black female teen come up to me and was basically sharing wow, you were the first person that looks like me that is feeling what I'm feeling. So that really continues to drive the work that I do today. That doesn't even touch the injustices within our justice system towards our Black men. I had a friend, unfortunately, commit suicide 2 years ago, who was a part of this system. And it's just so interesting how he was even treated differently because of his race, but that's a whole different story. So it's really there has, like, again, it has to go back to that education piece. I think about myself, how it could have been different if my parents had a little bit more education. If I even knew a little bit more about mental health, mental illness, where to even go to look for help, I wouldn't have had to kind of gain, unfortunately, all these unhealthy coping mechanisms. And like you said, Coco, about going in the hospital and just allowing yourself to be, you know, not putting up that wall anymore, not using all of those things you did to get by through all of the years. And definitely the same thing I have had to do as well. But to the original question, like, it really is taboo. And a lot of us are going through it. A lot of us have gone through it. A lot of us know somebody that is going through it. And like, I just wish that we would just be more supportive for one another and get rid of that. It's crazy. It's demonic. It's this and that. Because if I'm coming to your church and I'm asking you to pray for my diabetes, you're not going to call me a demon and hash prayer out on me, you know. But that, I can't generalize all churches like that. That's not all churches, just the ones that are really lacking education. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think the more we talk, the more we share our story, like even myself having to take that step of bravery and being like, you know what, this is my story, just so that somebody else doesn't feel the way that I felt as a teen. It's helpful. And, you know, just as Mariama was talking about as a new immigrant, like that's a whole different worm, ball of cans, I don't know what the phrase is, you know. Right now we're seeing a lot of our newcomers, unfortunately, on the street dealing and struggling with their mental illness and whatnot, because we haven't really spoken about what is it like to come into a new country. You may not know anybody and you're experiencing all of these different stuff. You don't even know how to navigate the health system, less the mental health system. So we excuse me, we really got to start conversing more and supporting one another and just educating. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I said, like, I'm eating a lot today. I guess that it will take me time to digest this answers, because your story, your experience are all amazing, and I can understand the reason why you are behind, you know, this work. It's something that is tied to your story, and you know, when I hear you speaking, like, I see myself in every part of things you said, so I can conclude that it's something that all women can experience, like all women can face in one time of their life, or, you know, differently. You know, it's something that speaks to all of us. And thank you so much. I'm so grateful. So I have another question that just come back. So that says that there is talk now with everything going on about the issue of defunding the police. What are your thoughts on this? And also, that says that if a mental health provider should go with the police to a site.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that one. I'm actually have a whole list of things when it comes to defunding the police. So if it's okay if I go first, I'll try to keep it short and sweet. Okay. Yeah, so I have a very dear friend of mine who is a former police officer, and she disagrees with defunding the police, although there needs to be a rehaul, a redo, there needs to be restructured. And there are certain demands that we as a Black community, as an Indigenous community, as human beings on the planet need to ensure that happens. So I get that we want that the way the policing works right now is not working. It's not working. And so in doing my research and what's happening in the US and what people are bringing forward to Congress and what have you, there was a number of things that they suggested that needs to happen if we're going to not necessarily defund the police, but we're actually going to have there needs to be a comprehensive national use of force standard. I'll say that again, a comprehensive use of force standard. To ensure that practices like excessive force, like chokeholds and knees to the neck, are completely banned, right? So police officers are no longer allowed to put their knee on someone's neck or choke them or use that. That excessive deadly force is only used as a last resort. So when someone's running away, just because they escaped your custody, that's not a reason to shoot them in the back. Right? That's not because they're not facing any danger. They're not a danger to you when they're running away from you. So we have to demand from a national level across Canada that these things happen, that we make sure that extensive mandatory de-escalation tactics become the first response, which means that training needs to happen, an overhaul in the way that officers are trained, that they are fully trained in de-escalation, and that yes, there are mental health practitioners that are called in to deal with mental health calls, so that there's a system in a place. There's a number that that parents can call when and that their child is put in the system. And we know when someone is bipolar or schizophrenic or having a mental health breakdown, that they're taken to the hospital and that they're treated fairly. A comprehensive anti-Black and Indigenous training is also mandatory, along with a national database of misconduct. So we have to make sure that they are fully trained to understand their own implicit bias, understand the racism within the system, understand prejudice and how it relates to anti-Blackness and anti-Indigenous. And then if there's any police officers that have misconduct complaints, that they are put on a database, and that unfit officers are held accountable legally for use of force and misconduct by dismissal, charges, convictions, sentences, and time served, right? So by way of review, it's the national standard, right? There's more training that needs to be done. There is deadly force banned and only used as a last resort, comprehensive training, and accountability. And if we can ensure that those things are put into law, that then we can hold officers accountable for their actions and put a stop to what they're doing, again, by them being fired, charged, convicted, sentenced, and time served. That's my bit, and I'm sticking to it.
I want to follow up there. And I'm actually in agreement with Nicole, because I don't believe in this defunding the police. I think it's a distraction from what the truth is. And Nicole touched on so many of the points I would touch on. So I'm just going to add to some of what she said. And I remember reading a story this morning, even as recently as this morning, where police officers who are actually good are hindered from advocating for, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. They're actually hindered from being, as one would call, a snitch. So when they have to report the misconduct of another police officer, they're penalized. Some of them have actually been fired. Some of them have been disciplined. Some of them have been demoted. So that's another big piece of it. You're seeing it in the US and you're seeing it here. And it's the restructuring of the funding. It's not, because when a population is growing, how can you defund the organization that is put forward to protect and serve? It's to look at the budget and how is the budget disseminated. So actually there's a chart that came out this morning as to how the Toronto police budget is broken down. And the majority of the budget is in uniforms. Over half the budget is for uniforms. So that tells you that there is something that is happening there. So when Coco spoke about retraining, that is a must. One of the things an American chief of police said was, and he regrets it now, he's no longer on the force, and he said, when police officers come into the training camps, one of the things that they do is they show them videos, and these videos normally have Black people in it. In Canada, it would have Black and Indigenous people in it because these are the most marginalized here in Canada. So they are psychologically trained, and it goes into their psyche that a Black person is this. So, and this is in all their training videos. And now he regrets doing it because he has trained police officers that are on the force that when they see a Black person, this is how they see them. And again, we're seeing the same thing in the media. The media has done it. So the society has done it. When you see a Black person with a hoodie, for example, this is how you see them. It's the same thing that's happening with the police. They're psychologically being taught to think a particular way. And the use of force is so, you're seeing police officers who are saying, it's their right to do a chokehold. It's their right to go down on somebody, whether it's a woman or a man. So again, it's about the retraining. You can't defund somebody and expect them to be retrained. And then the other piece to it is when we come to the mental health part, is adding the mental health units. So like I know in, I can't remember, I think in Toronto, there's really, or in Scarborough, I think there's one mental health unit. So when you call, and I know we've had to call, when you call, they'll tell you that their unit is busy. So do you want a unit to come by? And so if there needs to be actually more funding into one, training the police, and two, adding units as to who has to come out, because depending on what people may not understand, depending on the crisis somebody in their illness is experiencing, they may need somebody with one, de-escalation tactics. They're always going to need de-escalation, but there might be a need for a police officer or security of some sort to help move them from their home environment or whatever environment, whether they're on a TTC or whatever, into the hospital. So the training for and having that extra staff is absolutely, absolutely, absolutely needed, because some of our loved ones that have to go into hospital are being re-traumatized. Because when a police officer comes for them, they either have to be taken in handcuffs, or if they don't go in handcuffs, they have to be strapped to a gurney. So imagine somebody who is already being traumatized in psychosis, being put through this. And if they've ever had to be in restraints in a hospital, they're being re-traumatized. So it's easy to say to defund the police, but it's bigger than just defunding the police. We have to refund how they're funded, and we have to add funding to our community supports. Yeah. In a long nutshell. That was a long nut. That was like a, I don't know, pistachio, peanut, everything.
Wow.
I'm in agreement though. I'm in agreement. Defunding the police, no, we need more resources, especially for our crisis support workers to just come along board with our police officers. I can't remember the man's name who recently was killed by the police in the Peel region due to a mental health crisis. Like, I look at that and I would be scared if I opened up my door and there were a bunch of police there with their guns shouting and whatnot. So imagine that on top of experiencing a mental health episode. So I think that situation could have been completely avoided if we had that crisis support worker that knew how to de-escalate and all of those other things. But again, like, the funding is not there, the resources are not there, and that needs to change. It's unfortunate you call and there's a busy signal, so it's not defunding. We need funds for these resources and for these workers to work alongside of our police, and definitely our officers need to be trained completely differently when it comes to mental health. I think sometimes I'm not a police officer, so I can't really speak on that, but it's, safety first, let's get rid of the problem. And it's not always with weapons and handcuffs you get rid of a problem. So we definitely need more resources for our crisis support workers and more education for our police officers.
And they need more training, but they also need more support. You know, they're working too long hours. They're working, you know, when I spoke to my friend who is a former police officer, sometimes they're working 12 hours, 2 or 3, 4 days a week. The amount of stress that they're under, right? We have to remember though too how police the system was formed in the first place, and it was to, you know, it was originally created to find slaves, escaped slaves, and to bring them to justice. That is how the police force was completely, after slavery was quote unquote abolished. So there is a very dark history in the force, and there are people still alive, obviously today, who don't want, there are officers that are quitting the force because they don't feel they need to be under these rules and regulations. And I've even heard a police officer say, I'm not here to serve and protect Black people, and if I have to do that, then I'm quitting the force. So we can't just simply say that, you know, retraining is important, rather that there are certain police officers that need not be on the force altogether, and that is a whole nother kettle of fish that we cannot ignore as well.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for this answer. I hope it answered the questions of Sharma. That was her question. So we are come to the end of this IRAS conversation, and I'm so glad that we discussed about, you know, this issue that is affecting all the Black community, even white people that are really not concerned or are compassionate with us, or are, you know, are standing with us, are against this situation. And I hope and I believe that this conversation will not stop here, but there will be more roundtable conversation in our community, even in our churches, in family, in a group, in a friends group, where people can help each other, provide tools, and, you know, to help them overcome this, you know, situation, this atmosphere that is not positive at all for us. But I'm pretty sure that with tools and support, we can overcome. We are more stronger, like Black people are made strong. So we are stronger in mental, even though we know that we can be affected, but we've been through harder situations than this. So thank you so much for joining this conversation, for being part of the conversation, and also for your time that you provided. I hope that we will have another opportunity like that, but more physically, where we will be, you know, touching community. We will be, you know, in presential, where we can talk more about mental health, because it's not really something that interests our community, but is vital for our health, you know. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for all of you, the wonderful job you are doing in your community. And I hope we are going to meet again very soon and do something bigger, even bigger.
Thank you for having us, and I know, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to sit with you and have this conversation, and it's enlightening for me as well.
Perfect. And if people want to, like, for people who are following us, like, I know you are different, you are working in different aspect of this mental health issue, and I heard Coco is working with trauma, women in trauma. Do you think that they can contact you if they wanna, you know, they need assistance or help? If it's possible to provide your website, or even the way they can contact each of you. So for anything related to trauma, anxiety, depression, mental health.
Well, definitely, I'll throw it in the comments on your page. But mine is pretty simple. If on Instagram and on Twitter, Victory Speaks 7. Victory as in VICTORY, speaks with an S, 7.
Yeah, same for me. It's my name, Coco LaRain, VEIRA, on all my social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram. I'm very rarely on Twitter, but and even on LinkedIn, COCOLA Rain, VEIRA is the handle there. So feel free to reach out for sure. And thank you for this conversation, for making this happen. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's definitely needed. I'm a bit more complicated when it comes to social media. So you can connect with me on Instagram at Censored Reality, or you can visit my website, robinsimpson.ca. I also found a Christian faith-based ministry. So if you want more information on that, just visit overflowministries.ca, or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram with that name.
Sorry, what was your Instagram handle again?
Censored Reality, so CENSORED
Yeah. Oh, and you can also find my podcast on where you can find a podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and it's Victory Speaks. You can find the podcast there.
Awesome. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you so much. I love you all, and I hope we can meet again soon.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.